Okay, hey everyone. I'm so happy to do this sci-fi panel. Sci-fi is my favorite genre ever, and I just want to read like every science fiction book possible and every specifically YA sci-fi. So I'm ready for that. Um, I wanted to just go through some general housekeeping rules first. The first one is that we don't tolerate any harassment or any hate speech of any kind, and that if you are guilty of that, then we will just ban you and it will just be your own fault at that point. I want to say that at the end, you can ask questions. So if during the panel you have questions, obviously just throw them in the chat box and then we'll scroll back up, or you can just save them to the end. Do whatever you want. It's up to you. And without further ado, we'll just chat because we have a lot of really great questions and I'm just so excited. So to do brief introductions, my name is Lily and I am a book blogger slash book person now on the internet on a variety of different internet places. And yeah, I started doing sci-fi fantasy reviews and kind of have never stopped, except branched out a little bit to kind of now everything I read is fair game. I'm really excited for this panel, and so hopefully we can just start with introductions, starting with Akemi.
Hi, my name is Akemi Dawn-Bowman. I am the author of the Infinity Court series, which is about a girl who dies and ends up in the afterlife and discovers it's been taken over by an AI.
Hi, I'm MK England. I'm the author of The Disasters and Spell Hacker and Guardians of the Galaxy No Guts, No Glory, which just came out this week. Exciting.
Hi, I'm Lora Beth Johnson, and I am the author of Goddess and the Machine and the sequel Devil and the Device. Goddess is about a girl who wakes up 1,000 years too late from cryonic stasis to discover that she's been worshipped as a sleeping goddess by a society that sees technology as magic.
Hi everyone, I am Alechia Dow, and I'm a huge fan of all the authors here. And every time they all talk about their books, I'm like, so good. I wrote The Sound of Stars, which is about a alien and rebel librarian road trip to possibly save humanity, and The Kindred, which is about an alien crash landing and possibly saving humanity. I think they're very similar, but they're not. I swear.
They're not. One is like Rebel Librarian and one is like neon romance. It's with space. My name is Rebecca Koffendaffer. I am the author of the YA space opera duology Crown Chasers, which came out last year, and Thronebreakers, which came out just a couple weeks ago, and it is about a wise-ass space pilot who gets embroiled in imperial politics while shooting finger guns and trying to stay alive.
And also Hell Monkey is there.
And also the actual fan favorite, her love interest Hell Monkey.
Yeah, I love all of these books so much, obviously, since everyone was so kind to agree to join us and to basically just humor me and my love of YA sci-fi. I think one of the biggest things I've thought about in YA sci-fi and just science fiction in general, because there's a lot of like work that goes into world building and, you know, making science stuff work, but like not necessarily real science stuff. So I want to know, what do you think the biggest challenges are with writing sci-fi, and or what are the easiest things about writing sci-fi?
Did we just want to go start at top and go down like we did with the introduction?
I was pointing up to Akemi.
Is it me? Sorry, it's my fault. I was waiting for somebody to do it. I was like, am I supposed to go? Sorry. The hard, I think for me, one of like the trickier parts, because my sci-fi is sort of like a blend. It's like a sci-fi fantasy mashup. And I feel like with sci-fi, with fantasy, it's like you can suspend disbelief, you know what I mean? And just kind of enjoy it for what it is. And I think with sci-fi, they want rules and they want to know how things work. And so I found that part, I think, really difficult, because I'm just kind of like, I just want to make things up and everybody can just be along for the ride. And my editor was kind of like, no, I want to know how that's possible. So I think for me, that was kind of the hardest part, is just making sure that you kind of like, I don't know, balance that line. And the easiest part, I guess, is just the making stuff up part. I really enjoy that, just being like left to my own devices and just creating a world out of nothing. And yeah, so.
Yeah, I definitely second some of that. It is so fun to come up with creative, techie solutions to plot problems often. I'm like, oh no, they need to get from point A to point B, and there's a problem. So we're going to make up a ride pod system or something that exists now. And the challenge is always to make it feel real and logical and grounded in that universe, and to make sure that no matter how fantastical you get with your technology or your magic or whatever, Spellhacker has both, that you make sure that the world always feels real and possible to the reader.
Yeah, I'm just going to agree with everything that's been said here. The hard part is, especially depending on who your readers are and what brand of sci-fi they come from, they're expecting something that is possible moving from where we are now as a society into the future. So they're expecting to be able to trace back the steps to where we are now. And that's really tricky, especially if you are not science and technology minded like me. And then the best part, I think, is just it's where my brain goes anyway. I'm working on a fantasy right now, and it's really difficult to not throw in a spaceship or aliens or things like that. Like that's just the thing that my brain goes to, and it's really kind of fun to play with those tropes that I grew up on.
I have to agree with everyone else. It's really, the hard part is balancing the sci with the fi. So I really, you have to do it's a lot of thought that goes into every little element of world building and where to put it and how to put it and make sure it's not slogging anything off and the pacing. It's a constant, thing going on in your brain when you're doing it. And sometimes it's really hard. But when you're lucky and you have great CPs and you have a great editor, you kind of know where you're supposed to put things and how you're supposed to do it and make sure that you're having a lot of fun. And the easy part is having fun and creating. Just like MK said, it's really about having fun and making these fantastical worlds and just like, creating. It's yeah.
Yeah, I think what I would add to that is that from a personal perspective, some of the challenge for me was not just grounding, like there's the grounding element, but there's also like, for me, it was also how like pushing my brain far enough in terms of coming up with because if I think about where I was when I was 13 years old and just where technology is just, years later, that is a huge jump that I couldn't have imagined when I was a kid. So trying to do that with the space world and not being held back by the known and instead being all like, oh, we could go anywhere. Like if I could do it again, I think I would have pushed it farther. And as for the easiest part, I really, really loved making up planets. I really just loved being all like, this planet, and it's got Lego people on it, and this one has whales that swim in sandstorms, and that's just like letting the weirdness really go in that sort of place where I didn't have to have the technological element to it.
I just wanted to real quick ditto that extremely hard. Between the disasters and Spellhacker, I read a book by Michio Kaku that was something about, technology of the future. And it made me realize, oh my God, I did not go hard enough in the disasters. And so the Spellhacker technology is on a different level. So yes, to that a lot.
If I'm being honest, that's a huge reason why Goddess, the technology in Goddess has devolved so that I could be like, oh, of course they didn't, I didn't go that far because, the society had devolved. So yeah, that's why.
I like that. I like you're like, I'm just going to slip this excuse right on in. We're just going to build it. We're going to build it right into the recipe. It's fine.
Most of my world building is problem solving, problems that I made for myself.
That is so fascinating. Yeah, because with I think with like Second World or whatever it's called, like worlds, basically, there's so much work put into defining like the very basic kind of mundane, but also obviously the super high level planet kind of stuff. But also, as you were saying, MK, like how do you get from place to place? You know, it's it's not just about galactic war. It's also about kind of the daily life. I wanted to know, and I guess it kind of feels very similar, maybe to what some of you have already said, but sort of what draws you to the science fiction genre specifically? And did you always know you wanted to write a sci-fi book, or did it just magically happen?
Are we doing the same thing? Yeah, it's just so I know. I don't want to keep jumping in. Yeah, I think for me, I always kind of knew I love Star Wars. So like I think like a lot of people, and so I grew up. That was what I was watching, so that was always in the back of my head of like I would love to write this like massive thing that felt a little bit fantasy, but took place with all this different like droids and aliens and creatures and all this stuff. And so yeah, that was kind of, I think my heart was always there. I also played a lot of Zelda, so I think that got like mixed together, which is probably why my stuff is like a blend now. But yeah, I kind of lost track of the question. I hope I answered that fully, but I'll let somebody else answer now.
Yeah, definitely the same. I was a Star Wars kid by a lot. Like I have a whole shelf of Star Wars books over there. They were just hugely formative when I was young. Not just when I was young. I mean, I still read them. And it's not just Star Wars. It's like I consumed every science fiction property I could get my hands on. I loved Farscape. I loved Firefly. If it had spaceships, I was there. And one of the things that I love so much is that a bunch of people trapped in a tin can in the middle of the void of space is such a great recipe for a wonderful found family. And I feel like, so much of my favorite sci-fi has that found family aspect of it. And I love it so much. Also lasers and spaceships and stuff. They're cool.
So first I want to apologize for my dog. She's very upset right now. I didn't get a dog sitter. And so if you hear her whining in the background or popping in and out, it's because she's very upset that I'm not paying attention to her. But the thing that I really love about sci-fi is that at its heart, it's primarily about like hope for the future. And so I think especially because we live in a world that's especially right now very dark, and it can get really reality for me could just get really overwhelming. And so sci-fi is like, it's an escape in that even though the stakes can be huge, like a world is at stake or the universe is at stake, there's still a kind of lighthearted hopefulness to sci-fi, and especially sci-fi that's meant to take place in our future. It's like, look, we survive. Look, humans survive, and they go out and travel the stars and make these big discoveries. And so I think it's really about the hopefulness, and it's a way to explore things that might be too overwhelming to explore in fiction that's too close to my reality. So I can explore that, like remove it one level by adding spaceships or lasers or things like that. And then I can explore something in what feels like a much safer space.
So I didn't watch Star Wars until I was a teenager. It was not a big deal at my house. Nobody liked science fiction. That was all on me. I went to the library when I was really young, and I found X-Men, and that was it. That was my like gateway sci-fi into everything. I read the comics. I was, really into it, and I loved that it was a look at civil rights and how it paralleled to what was going on. And I think what I really, really appreciated about it, and you can tell in all my books that is a big theme, is morality and what makes a human human and what makes us alive. And I'm always kind of questioning these things and exploring that. And being able to do that is like such a huge honor. And I don't know if I ever give a definitive answer, but I know that getting to explore it is really a joy because it's definitely something that I've always thought about. And yeah, I think X-Men is one of those things where you're just like superpowers and it's awesome and everybody's doing things. But secretly, it's an exploration of civil rights and, you know, how people treat other people and how people treat those who are different than them. And I loved that growing up as like one of the only Black kids in a very white town. So it felt like the absolute right thing. And I hope that with my books, I can give that to someone who might be feeling similar.
That is, yeah. I mean, I loved all of the answers. I think Alicia's point that sci-fi is an exploration of what does it mean to be human, and I really feel like that gets to the heart of a lot of sci-fi. I was a sci-fi fantasy nerd jointly, and always sort of thought I was like, well, yeah, I like fantasy, you know, and yeah, I'm going to write a fantasy book. And that's where I started. And I don't know that I necessarily started thinking, yeah, I'm going to go sci-fi first. But when I started looking back at so many of the formative properties besides Star Wars, you know, Star Trek Next Generation, which really plays to Lora Beth's comment about hope and how sci-fi can be an exploration of hope. And who are my heroes? Ripley was a hero for me for so long. I watched that movie maybe a little too young, and you know, like, you know, Aliens was amazing. And so I have discovered in the course of kind of looking at Crown Chasers and the publication and looking at my influences, it's like sci-fi was always there, and it just provides a different angle to be able to explore the things that I want to explore, which is, you know, how do we stretch, you know, where does the imagination go, but also how does it affect us, like, as people and as we develop and as societies and cultures develop.
Yeah, I find it's interesting as everyone was kind of sharing their first experiences with sci-fi. I was trying to think of like, oh, what was my first experience with sci-fi? And um, my dad was a huge Star Trek fan, and I think Next Gen is like his favorite. But I didn't really watch it until a couple of years ago. But it was weird when I guess when I first discovered sci-fi, it was during college, but it was under such like a toxic kind of gate-kept way in which I was like the one who wanted to be in the sci-fi like lit class, and then everyone like wouldn't let me in essentially. But then obviously, look how the tables have turned. We already talked a little bit about sci-fi influences and sci-fi inspirations, but I wanted to ask if anyone also wanted to share more sci-fi influences / inspirations, or even you could say like recent sci-fi books you read as well that you love. Just more sci-fi love, basically.
I'm like terribly behind on my reading pile, so I have a lot of sci-fi books that I'm planning to get to, but I feel like I haven't finished them yet, so it's a problem. But I do watch like movies. I feel like when I'm editing or writing, it's hard for me to actually read like at the same time. I don't know if anybody else is like that, but so it's easier for me to consume media that's you know, something visual, like, you know, movies or TV or whatever. And so I've seen The Expanse, which I really like. I also really like WALL-E, and I feel like those are two very, very different things. But I think I guess for me, like, that just proves how much I love it, because it doesn't matter what it is if there's like robots on there. So
yeah, trying to think past the Star Wars is difficult because it was such a fixture of my upbringing. But you know, more recently there's been stuff like Killjoys and Dark Matter, which I just love Dark Matter. And you know, there's been so much great sort of sci-fi light that's been out lately, like Joan Hu's book, The Ones We're Meant to Find. I knew I was going to screw up that title if I didn't look at it. You know, and I love that, you know, space opera never seems to die, because it's my truest love in the sci-fi umbrella. I'm always, if there's a spaceship, I'm gonna read it or watch it. So I just love seeing more and more all the time. And now, you know, having worked on Guardians of the Galaxy, getting to like put my own thumbprint in those universes and being like, but how can I make it gay? Like, where can I shove this in there? So, you know, it's fun to kind of expand out into some of these other universes and get to try my hand at some of the things that have influenced me so much, because Guardians was a huge influence on the disasters, the humor and the tone and everything. So yeah, it was fun.
I don't think I mentioned, oh, sorry, this is Coco, and Coco wants attention. Yeah, I should have gotten a dog sitter, but I didn't think about it. But I think that obviously, like everybody else, except Alicia, apparently, the biggest influence is Star Wars, and I think for me, it's that blend of sci-fi and fantasy in Star Wars that was really kind of, and then there's just so many genres in Star Wars, and none of the genres take themselves too seriously. So like the kind of swashbuckling pirate kind of thing, and you know, the space religion and the laser swords and things like that. It was just very joyful, and like, you know, when you're a kid, you want to imagine things that are like what's possible. You don't have those boundaries on your brain of you know, what is what's possible or what's credible and what's not. And so it was just, you know, I can't wait until I, you know, have my own laser sword, or why hasn't anybody developed teleportation yet? I could do that. So I think that was really formative for me, was Star Wars, and then things like Star Trek, and seeing the difference between the two, Star Wars being science fantasy, and Star Trek being much more sci-fi. And then recently, I just think what these amazing authors are doing is just a huge influence for me, and seeing the different like the different voices and the different approaches that people are taking, and how they're playing with tropes, because I think, especially because YA sci-fi is much smaller than YA fantasy, we don't get to see as many of the same trope recycled and shifted and morphed into something new. And so with the smaller group of us that are writing sci-fi, that's one of my favorite things, is to see how each of us are doing the trope differently. And it's really challenging to be like, oh, that's something I want to do. I wish I had come up with that. How can I take that and make it my own, or make it a little bit different?
So I am also in the same boat, where I do not kind of read any sci-fi when I'm writing sci-fi. I think there's you can cross a line by accident, and you really have to be very conscientious of that. So I read sci-fi when I'm not in drafting mode. What I do read is adult romance, because that seems to be like the thing that is really like cathartic. I don't know why, it's really just very calming to me. But the media that I'm inhaling right now, TV shows, Foundation, I'm a huge fan of Foundation right now. I think it's very, very clever. And I did not enjoy Isaac Asimov when I was a kid. So it's interesting to see how they've adapted it and made it, I don't know, more open for everyone. And then I loved The Mandalorian. I think space western is awesome, and it has this kind of closed-circuited like arc in every episode, with the overarching arc there as well. And it's like super cool, very clever, very well done. Considering there's different visions per each episode, it's like amazing. I love Star Trek Discovery. I'm like so into it. I don't know. My mom would sometimes like watch Star Trek and no, not Enterprise. I don't know. I have no idea. It was like, I don't know, in the early 90s. She was watching that, and then you'd come in and she'd be like, nothing, no, I'm not watching anything. What? Sci-fi was a no-go in my family. So I had no idea what Star Trek was about. And I watched it and I was like, oh, it's pretty cool. But Star Trek Discovery is that one where I was like, there are black people and they get to be captains, and I didn't know that. That's so cool. And I think of it, and Star Wars, I finally was able to like sneak it from the library and watch it on VHS in my room. And I was like, I have no idea. I was like, this is a whole new world opening up to me, and I'm having the best time. So I am influenced by a lot. Rebecca Koffendaffer's book, Crown Chasers was that one where I read it and I was like, are you serious? What? And the disasters where I was like, oh, this is so much fun. And then Lora Beth's as well, where you sent it to me and it wasn't out yet. And I was like, I don't know, a year before. And I was like, mind blown. Linguistics, looking at linguistics in this way in science fiction, amazing. I don't think any of us, I had read Akemi's Contemporary. I still have not read yours because I cannot get a copy in Germany right now. But I'm just blown away by how everyone is doing it in such different ways. And then I think Honor Among Thieves by Rachel Kane and Anna Guar, also really intense and beautiful. And it's just like, what are we doing? And Iron Widow that just came out, and Gear Breakers that just came out, and they're all in my piles. And I'm like, and The Space Between Worlds, which is adult, is on my list too. And it's like, I'm getting through them. I have to get them at some point when I'm not drafting, which is never, I think. But wow, what a time, right? I mean, at the same time that these epics that are problematic, like Dune, and there is some issues, I think, with Foundation, but the adaptation is going great. When those are being made, now you can see what could possibly be made in the future, because all of these great sci-fi works are epic and amazing. They're coming out, and I'm just like super excited.
Yeah, I agree with Alechia. There's what I don't think people give a lot of credit for, especially in the YA sci-fi space, because it is just a smaller genre category, is they don't give credit to the breadth of differences that come with this. Like, people go like, it's sci-fi. Oh, it's a ship in space. It's like, no. That's one very specific kind of sci-fi, but you have so many different kinds out there. There's going to be a sci-fi for you. I almost guarantee it. Like, dystopia is sci-fi, but people don't remember it. Superheroes are technically sci-fi. People forget that too. And and the voices that are coming into this space now, like Iron Widow and Gear Breakers and all of you guys on the panel, are bringing new perspectives, queer perspectives, marginalized perspectives, BIPOC perspectives to sci-fi and the YA sci-fi space. And I think that's very exciting. As far as like personal influences go that I didn't talk about, like the rebooted Battlestar Galactica from the early 2000s, Alyssa Farshad in Crown Chasers is basically just my crush on Katie I can't remember names, but Starbuck. Thank you. Katie Sackhoff's Starbuck just basically lifted whole Haas from that show and plunked down. And I'm like, but what if I got to ride Starbuck? I drove through a snowstorm in April in the Rocky Mountains to meet Katie Sackhoff, like to stand next to her for about 10 seconds, but it was worth it. So I think, that, and then like sci-fi horror, some of the comments we're talking about Jurassic Park, sci-fi horror, The Thing, Alien, the first Alien is sci-fi horror. Like, there is just so much variety, and there's so much space to take these ideas of, what is human and what is technology, and how do we interact and where does it go? And really explore it in really neat and interesting ways. So I'm very excited. I'm very excited about the sci-fi that's coming out. And I'm hoping that more and more people will see all of the benefits, and it will just grow this YA sci-fi backlist to even like bigger heights.
Yeah, I think that everyone can probably echo that they would just like even more and more sci-fi like every day, basically. That would be my dream come true. Before I dive into the next question, I just I just remembered that I need to clarify that my dad's favorite Star Trek was not Next Gen, it's Voyager. So I don't want to get in trouble. I just want to set the record straight. I misspoke, but I've been corrected.
Voyager is totally under, like, people don't give Voyager enough credit. It was weirder, but it was good.
Yeah, my dad actually sent me an email for every season with his favorite episodes so that I could watch those specifically in like the greatest hit list, basically. But now that the record's set straight, I wanted to say that I wanted to talk about something that we've all kind of been chatting a little about, which is sci-fi and what draws you to sci-fi and visions of the future. So I wanted to ask, since much of sci-fi is about that very thing, about like an alternate vision or a vision of the future world, when you were writing your books, what was the most important element that you knew you had to include in the world? You know, like what was the thing that you had to put in it because like that was the thing you wanted to talk about?
So I really wanted to write about artificial intelligence in the sense of how we use it as well, like Alexa and Siri and all that, and because it always seems weird to me that you're basically just telling somebody like a AI to do something like all day long, and I just kind of had this thought of like, I wonder if they know what's going on and like what would happen if they escaped like the confines of like what they're locked in. And I had this idea for the afterlife of what if they hacked their way into the afterlife and basically just took over. And so, yeah, that was the kind of thing that I really wanted to include. It kind of gave me some freedom to have it take place in a world where your imagination essentially has no limits and you can create whatever you want to, just as long as you figure out how to use, your creativity essentially, and to have that kind of play with this AI kind of enemy. So yeah, that was the kind of like main thing that I wanted. And I wanted like a sidekick robot, and it didn't really work right. So I kind of created like creatures instead called Dalines, and there's going to be a sidekick of that in the sequel. So I'm happy about that.
So for me, for both the Disasters and Spell Hacker, the thing that was the sort of element of the future that was most important to me to include had nothing to do with technology or anything, and it was more that I did not want a single straight white cis men on any of my casts anywhere near it. And I just needed everything to be super, super queer. That was like priority numero uno from the very start. But I also thought it was important for the Disasters, because that one is set in our own future, to have that element of hope. There are such like brief references, like one line here, one line there, of like climate change, we dealt with that, we survived, like this giant war that's been, going on for years, and people like will not stop killing each other, that's been resolved. I wanted to feel hopeful about some of the things that plague our world. Whereas for Spell Hacker, that was a second world completely separate from our own, so I didn't kind of have those constraints. So for there, it was just that shiny idea of using technology to manipulate magic that I really wanted to dig into.
As far as sci-fi tropes, I did manage to get a robot sidekick into Goddess, and I forced it in there. I was like, this is going to happen. But I think the thing that obviously is the main element is in Goddess is the linguistics and how language has changed. I'm a huge linguistics nerd, and I just love what language does, as far as how language is the way through which we understand reality, but also the way that we create reality together. And so what I find really interesting is that depending on what kind of language you speak, you have a different reality than people who speak a different language. And the words that we use and the way that we talk about things is making our reality. It's constantly creating and recreating how we perceive the world around us. And so that was the big crux of Goddess, was figuring out, it's not realistic at all, because if it was realistic, like, we wouldn't be able to read it, but figuring out something within the universe that would make sense of how language has changed from now till then, and then putting the reason that there are two points of view in Goddess is that they're speaking different languages, so that you're seeing two alternate realities happening at the same time, but telling the same story. And so that was the thing that just had to happen in Goddess. And it's not really a sci-fi trope, but I think it's something that just logistically, it's really, I will never do it again. I will never write in a made-up dialogue ever again, or dialect ever again. It was super hard. So logistically, I think language shift doesn't find its way into sci-fi very often, or at least language shift on the level of how, so Star Trek, for instance, they should be speaking in a completely different dialect that we wouldn't understand. But logistically, that's just really, really difficult. And so I wouldn't recommend it.
But you do such an amazing job at it. I mean, I read that and I understood what was happening, and I often get confused by anything. So like, it was so good. It was so good. So, you know, I don't think a lot of people would ever do that. You know, I've never seen it done before, and I've never seen it done in print. I think you can get away with it in some of these, you know, bigger epics now, but I don't think I've ever seen it done in print in YA, and it was really, really smart. For me, The Sound of Stars was, I really wanted to look at the chosen one, and how even if you are not the chosen one and you are the one who could possibly save the world, but you have these intersections of, you know, race and class, how you might not want to save the world. And I don't know, maybe you just want to see the world burn. That's where I was coming from. You know, if you're really, really bitter about how you've been treated so far, and you have the ability to kind of save everything and keep it the way it was, then you might not want to do it. But if you have this hope that you could save everything and then change it, that might be the thing that spurs you into action. So that was what I did with The Sound of Stars. With The Kindred, it was, there's only one bed. There's, you know, it's a lot more romantic. It is a lot more fun, because I don't have to ground you in the reality so much of what's going on, because they're all aliens. With The Sound of Stars, I did two point of views, one in first, one in third, because I really wanted you to feel the disconnect between Ellie, who is human, and Morris, who is alien. And I loved having that disconnect, and I don't think it always worked. I liked it, and I think it worked great. But I think for some people, that's like, whoa, I feel like that's an alien. But with The Kindred, they're both aliens, so they're gonna be on the same level. So it was really fun to do that. But trope-wise, The Kindred's really all about your romance tropes, and I had a great time with that.
I would say the biggest sci-fi trope that I put into Crown Chasers and Thronebreakers to a certain degree was, I love the ship as character in space operas. I love, like I mentioned, Battlestar Galactica, and spoilers if you have not seen the end of it, but at the very, very end of Battlestar Galactica, the Galactica breaks. Like, she breaks like a spine. And I remember watching that final episode and seeing her state, and the pain of seeing her in that state after spending so many episodes, some of them good, some of them bad, with this ship. I love the ship as character, so I wanted to have the ship as character in both of these books. And then also on sort of a different level, not a trope, but I also, as a part of the space opera, wanted to build a queer normative worlds. And I wanted to go into Crown Chasers and Thronebreakers basically going like, this is a place where there are thousands of species and planets, and queer is just normative because there's no reason for it not to be. And so I wanted it to be sort of a safe universe for that particular focus.
Yeah, I love everything that everyone was saying, and also this idea of the language in the Goddess in the Machine also is something that I really loved, and I think all of the, as Rebecca was saying earlier, like everyone's vision of sci-fi and sci-fi worlds and sci-fi futures are all so different, as well as finding all under this umbrella of YA sci-fi, which is so fun. I wanted to remind people that they can start leaving questions, because I'm going to ask a few more questions, but then we can answer audience questions. So you can feel free to kind of start dropping those in the chat, and we will answer questions from the audience. What I wanted to ask, and Lora Beth has already talked a little bit about it, because, I mean, how could you not with Goddess in the Machine? But since the worlds of sci-fi are so different, there's often that disconnect between getting a reader from our contemporary world to understand like that shift basically to the sci-fi world that you're trying to build for people. And so I wanted to know, how did you approach communicating the changes to the world to the reader? You know, whether it's climate, fashion, culture, language, you know, any of those things. How did you breach sort of, or approach that gap, I guess, between what we know as our world and our reality versus the future world?
Yeah, I feel like that's hard with the Infinity Courts because it is like a completely made up afterlife. So there are themes that I'm trying to like avoid. It's very spoilery to talk about this book too much, so I'm trying to like figure out the right things to say. But it's about an AI who takes over, and in order to kind of I don't want to say like make people feel like they know what's going on, that they have an idea. Like I used a lot of tropes that would seem familiar, and it was sort of this idea that Ophelia's the AI, that she would also kind of use these familiar ideas. So she has, you know, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, but they're not called that. They're called her, you know, 4 princes, and they have these different courts. So there's like things that were kind of inspired by the world that I thought, like, if you were a computer and you had access to literally everything, all of history, like what pieces of it would you use to kind of, you know, manipulate the world? So yeah, I feel like it's a bit harder though, because it wasn't, because it was so made up. It wasn't like I was, you know, filling in the history gaps of like, oh, this is what happened from, you know, then and now. It was literally like she just took over. So, yeah.
Yeah, this question is really interesting because it made me think about the way writing The Disasters and writing Spellhacker was different, because one is our future and one is a second world. And I think I actually ended up kind of approaching it the same way, now that I think about it. And so one way was in the sort of little everyday details. It's like if you kind of give a reader something to latch on to, like, okay, we're talking about what kind of snacks this character likes, or, you know, what kind of clothes are in their bedside table or whatever. Then you can kind of wrap some of those other details around it. So, you know, the bedside table is on a spaceship and it's vibrating, you know, gently because the engines are, you know, on full throttle or something like that. So you can kind of approach a detail through something familiar, if that makes sense. Hopefully I explained that well. And then the other way is kind of grounding the reader in the space and in the experience through kind of like a tactile, physical sense. You know, if I can get really into the detail of like, okay, this like fake piece of technology that I'm holding, how does it feel to use it? How does it feel to hold it in my hand? You know, that kind of gives you a bridge to help kind of understand from a sensory perspective what it would be like to interact with that object. And I feel like that kind of makes it feel a little more real, but also like, you know, a thing that a human could actually hold and interact with, or an alien or a robot or whatever. You know, in my world they're humans.
I think this is something, you know, just because of the nature of Goddess, and then just because I'm not a very like visual person. I'm very much, you know, just in my brain all the time. I had to really stretch myself to include like those sensory details, because I'm a big fan of dropping you in the world and just hoping you can swim. And because it, you know, the thing, the new technology is not new for our main character. This is stuff that they just use all the time, and so it's not something new and shiny to them. It's just something that they live with. And then just kind of having them reference things and moving on, because they wouldn't be like, okay, let me explain how this works and how the history of this, because that's not something that they would really think about. And so I think, like MK was saying, it's a lot about making the thing, the technology, the piece of world building real to the main character. And the more it's real to the main character, that's going to kind of brush off on the reader. But then a lot of how I got around that was putting the main character in a world that she doesn't understand. And so having just other characters explain things to her as they are also explaining it to the reader.
I think with The Sound of Stars, it's very contemporary. It's definitely contemporary sci-fi. So I got to just kind of go with the reality and then shift it and tweak it to be like, oh, an alien invasion happened 2 years ago. So that's that. And we'll just build on it. And I did build on it. It's hard though, because when you write sci-fi and even if it's not contemporary and it's just straight up sci-fi, the accessibility is always on the forefront of your mind of how am I going to make this accessible to people who don't necessarily read sci-fi and don't know how you can just be dropped into it and you can sink or swim. And I love the swimming and I love being able to sink at the beginning and then swim. But it's hard to kind of find that balance. And, I'm 2 sci-fi books in and I'm still like learning my way through how to do that just the right way. And each book is different and each approach is going to be different. And and I love what everybody else said. I mean, the tactile, the sensory descriptions and, using all these little tools to help you understand is great. Sometimes I have to remember that. Like, I am just like, I see it in my head, so that's what I'm going to write. But then I have to remember, you got to go back and actually make sure they understand what you're saying. So.
Spoilers, I just cheated. I just put start date and then like a little snarky at the beginning of each chapter. The main character is just like start date, which is like, hey, super space thing. And then it's like, I'm here and this is my general state of mind. And it's a total cheat and I loved it. But like beyond that, I think I think Crown Chasers telegraphs really early on that it's this like super space opera thing. Like the first prologue, there's an alien, like they call him, and like they're like it's the Otari, and he's wandering through a planet, and stuff like that. So, and then the very first chapter, a lot of this is lended by Alyssa's voice, but it's like if you ever watched the movie Serenity does a great job as a movie introducing you, even if you did not see the show, because it's this single shot take all throughout the spaceship and you meet each character along the way. And the first chapter and kind of mimics that of Crown Chasers because she gets up, she's sort of trying to remember last night, she wanders through her ship. So you get that sort of tour. And in that, it's like, I go here, I go to the cockpit, I turn this thing, I'm getting a message, like, all of these things that really lend itself to sort of going like, are you seeing now where we're at? Do you see where we're at? Do you see? She's like, besides the fact that she's hungover. Yes. Okay. And that just sort of is a quick and easy way to be all like, you're in space. Congratulations.
I am seeing so many good questions and also ones that I had already kind of thought about asking. So I'm going to drop the giveaway link now. And I want to start with this one question, which I also had. I will put it up on the screen. Okay. Oh, that was too fast. Hold on. It was, did you find that writing YA sci-fi was a hard sell for agents/publishers? What was your querying journey like?
Yeah, I think everybody's experience is going to be different, I'm sure. For me, so I started I think the first 3 books that I queried were fantasy, and then my 4th was sci-fi, and that ended up being the one that got an agent, but it didn't sell. And then I wrote Starfish, which was a contemporary, and then that one ended up selling. And I do remember, like, at the time, though, I remember some of the feedback from the sci-fi one, and, like, no shade to anybody, of course. But I remember it being, like, it was so, like, oddly specific, but also, like, kind of, like, not fair. It felt like there was, like, such a small window of, like, what could be acceptable in sci-fi that they were willing to sell. And I felt in a lot of ways that it was, like, very limiting. Like, you weren't really allowed to just, like, do whatever you wanted, because they'd be like, oh no, that won't sell. So I remember one of the feedback that kept coming back with mine was like, we have too many books with younger siblings. And I was like, do you know how many people have younger siblings? How is that a requirement? I don't understand. So I felt that it was like a much narrow, more specific thing that they were looking for. But that being said, that was, I think back in like 2015 or 16. So things might have changed. I know there's like a big push now for like a bigger variety of books. So hopefully that's not how it used to be. But yeah, that was kind of my experience with trying to sell sci-fi.
So on the querying side, I feel like I was pretty lucky in that, I feel like a lot of people love sci-fi, but loving it and being able to sell it and put it out in the market and everything are two very different things. But there were at least some agents who were willing to try. And I, completely credit the sale of the Disasters to the strength of the agent that I was with at the time. I truly don't know how it sold. It's a miracle that it sold at all. It sold back in 2016, and like every single thing we heard back from agents was, we can't do sci-fi right now. We can't do sci-fi. We can't do sci-fi. And so it was it still sold fairly quickly, but again, I 100% credit that to my agent at the time. It's because then there was sort of a dearth of sci-fi for a while, right around when the Disasters came out. I feel like there just wasn't a whole lot going on, and then suddenly, like a year or two later, there started being some more stuff. So I think there was just sort of a weird gap there for a while. I have not tried to sell sci-fi in a little while, so I can't speak to the current market. I hope to sell sci-fi again. My next book is a YA rom-com, so and that's fun too. Like, please check it out. But sadly, it's not sci-fi. It is nerdy though, so it's got that. But I hope to sell sci-fi again, so I hope the market is feeling a little friendlier now.
The main pressure I felt with querying sci-fi was that the high level concept, or like the hook of the book, had to be so unique, and so, because like with fantasy, I feel like you can sell like various little shades of the same trope. Like it can just be, a whole tapestry of the same trope, but you have to be like the only person doing the thing that you're doing in sci-fi to really get attention for it, because I guess it is a hard sell, and I'm not sure anybody really knows why. But I think one of the best things that my agent did when we were on sub for Goddess was that she would call up the editors and be like, I have this, it's sci-fi, but wait, it reads like a fantasy. So like it was always like this, it's sci-fi, but, and there was always this but to it that it was unfortunate that we had to do, but also I think was just really smart on my agent's part to kind of get people's attention. And one thing that I'm noticing, so the German translation of Goddess came out like a month ago, and it seems to be doing really well. It has a fantasy title and a fantasy cover. And so they, like, a lot of what I'm seeing, not that I speak German, but like the little that I'm gathering is that people are saying, I wouldn't have picked this up if I knew it was a sci-fi, but I'm glad I did, thank goodness. But so it's like, I don't know, you've got to have like little tricks. And unfortunately, as an author, you don't have control over a lot of that. So what I just recommend writing what you love and trying to take what you love and making it as unique and as you as possible, because that's really what's gonna sell, is when you have a take on something that hasn't been seen yet.
Just wanted to jump really quick and say what you just said, Laura Beth, about there being a secondary element that gets pitched. Like, I think that's what it was with the disasters, is it's sci-fi, but wait, it's funny and it's lightning quick pacing. So give it a shot. Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head.
First I want to say hello to Amparo Ortiz, who's here. Hi. So cool, and I hope I didn't mess up your name. I'm really sorry. So querying The Sound of Stars was weird because I had queried a book before and it died on querying, and then I wrote The Sound of Stars and I submitted it to Pitch Wars and didn't get in. And then a week later there was a Pit Mad, and so I pitched it, and then suddenly people liked it. And that was weird. And then I got an agent like 2 weeks later, and that was super cool. But then I went for 6 months of revisions to make it. I don't know. I have no idea what the revisions were. They wanted, the agent wanted it to be more The Hate You Give with Aliens. And I can't do that. So I was like, that's not my level. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to do I don't want to go too realistic. I want to have fun. And I don't want every book about, by a Black creator to be about Black pain. And I don't think there's a place for that. So then I left that agent. Then I went to another agent who had offered before. And then we got The Sound of Stars on sub, and it was on sub for 6 months. And almost all the editors were like, it's not unique enough. We've had enough alien invasions. Or, I would like to see it more, The Hate You Give with Aliens. So I was like, I cannot find my place. I was prepared to just give that up. But thankfully Inkyard showed up and was like, I don't like sci-fi. Inkyard was like, we don't like it. The editor was, I don't really like it at all, but there's something there that has a spark for me, and I really want to kind of explore that. And that's just kind of how it happened. And then the Kindred happened, and it's like, I'm really grateful they're letting me do this. I'm really happy. I think I'm one of the few sci-fi at Inkyard right now. So I'm just taking it as I can, and I am not asking any questions, and I'm just seeing how much they're gonna let me get away with. And it's really, really fun. Is sci-fi hard sell? I mean, look at it. It's hard in a way, yes, but in another way, you got Iron Widow hit the list. You got, there's 1,000,001 sci-fi movies and sci-fi shows. There's really no reason why sci-fi should be a hard sell. It's really them deciding it's a hard sell. And if they change their minds, we're all here waiting for them. And there's a crop of writers that are ready to go, who have great books. And I hope that they just kind of, go, oh wow, there is an audience. Let me buy all that, because we're waiting.
What Alicia said, like, seriously, like, it isn't. I think people get into their headspace. You say like, oh, it's a sci-fi, and they're like, I don't read sci-fi, or they'll be self-deprecating. They'll be like, I'm not smart enough to read sci-fi, and it's like, no, it's and then you have to like qualify. You're like, well, it's not that kind of sci-fi. Like that, it's just, there's nothing wrong with any of those kinds of sci-fi. It's just, I think people get a block, and I think it's easier to find. I think it's easier to find an agent. So I queried an agent with the sci-fi and signed with that, but didn't sell it. I think sometimes it's a little easier to find agents who are like, I love this and try to sell it than it is to necessarily get through the sub stage with it. Because once you get to submissions, then you're in a situation where it's not just an editor who has to fall in love with it. It is a marketing team and it is a sales team. That's where I tend to think that there are a little bit more blocks, because there is not always, it doesn't feel like they always know, like, I think Lora Beth said, they don't always know how to sell it. They know how to sell fantasy, and they do it very well. And then you're like, okay, but spaceships. And they're like, I don't know. And right. And it's just like, no, we're here and we're passionate. And trust me, if you find sci-fi readers, they're going to just eat up everything, but they have not quite gotten past that sort of mental headspace of like, I don't even know how to find a sci-fi reader. What does it look like? Is it shaped like this? And you're just like, it's just people like sci-fi. So to kind of wrap it up, I think querying, you can find agents who are passionate about it. I think their job is going to be to sell it in a market that doesn't always know how to wrap their heads around it, but it is doable. Like Alechia said, like, we're here. There are YA sci-fi selling, maybe it's just a few every year, but they do sell. And I feel like we're opening up a space right now where maybe it's going to have a little bit of a boost, fingers crossed. So, I think that there's opportunity there. We just have to basically keep pushing. Just keep your foot in that door and don't let it shut.
Yes,
Honestly,
I second. Oh, sorry. No, you go first.
Sorry. I was just going to say, here's how we fix this, right? So I feel like the only people that publishing actually listens to these days is Book Talk. That's it. That's the only thing they care about. So we need to start a grand conspiracy of like the best people on Book Talk to just start hyping up sci-fi and like, look, you think you don't like sci-fi? Well, here's one if you like contemporary, and here's one if you like romance, and here's one if you like humor, and like just put it out there, and then suddenly in like 2.5 years there'll be a crap load of sci-fi out there. I'm telling you, let's do it.
MK's just fixed it. MK's just fixed
somebody who's not me. I don't understand TikTok.
I don't either.
Then there'll be like a book talkers recommend these sci-fi picks tables at bookstores. Yes, I think the question of the YA sci-fi market, it truly baffles me quite often, and almost in all the time actually, considering how often I want to talk about sci-fi and how when I do, everyone that I talk about is loving it. We're all reading like very similar things. It just, I don't know, it's baffling. I did want to ask one more question. We've already kind of talked, and this will be the final one because we're already after an hour. Everyone was kind of talking a little bit about sci-fi words of encouragement, or like talking about querying in the perspective as writers. A question that I had, and also a question that someone else had, which I can't find at the moment, is if you had any inspiring words for aspiring sci-fi writers. So hopefully we can end on that like positive note. And also for everyone else, the giveaway link is somewhere up in the chat. And while people are answering, I'll try to find it and resend it.
Yes, I feel like that's like a horrible one to follow up after we just were like, sci-fi is so hard to sell. Like, here's some encouragement. So now I feel terrible. But no, I mean, I'm not a believer in like universal advice. I feel like, you know what I mean? You have to like pick the stuff that works for you. So I'll just give like a general thing rather than like a sci-fi specific, and just say like, if you want to write a book, I mean, the first and like the most important thing you have to do is just write. I feel like there's not a correct way to do that. And, sometimes you write something and it's terrible, but you can also fix it, or you can shelve it and work on something else. And it's kind of just all practice towards the one thing, but nobody has written a book by just sitting only thinking about it. Like, you have to actually sit down. And even if you write one word a day, it's one word more than you had the day before. So just keep going with it.
Yeah, my number one, like, generic applies to all books advice is always like, just finish something, even if it's terrible, even if it's not going to be the one for you or something. Just like prove to yourself that you can get to the end, and you've done it once, you can do it again. As far as sci-fi goes, I always tell people, like, find the ooh shiny. What is ooh shiny about your world? Whether it's your vision of the future or a second world or something like that. Like, what is that detail that makes the world come alive for you, that makes you like so excited to share that version of the world? And then make sure that comes through in your query letter. Make sure that that element is really like buffed up and shined for in your book itself, because I feel like readers pick up on your enthusiasm. So wherever you direct that spotlight, then that's where readers will also.
Yeah, like MK said, readers pick up on your enthusiasm, and they also pick up when you are not so enthusiastic about things. So as much as like, does sci-fi sell? But you don't write to the market, because if you're just chasing trends, you will always be behind, and you won't be doing something that you love. So the best is that, like, when you can find things that sell that you love writing about, but like, who knows what's going to sell, in 2 years? Like, we just don't know. Nobody knows. I wish we did. So write what you love and what you're excited about. And if that's sci-fi, then write sci-fi and say, gosh dang it, I'm going to be a sci-fi writer, and just decide to do it. And then, like, I think the only universal pieces of advice to be a writer is to read a lot and write a lot. And I think everything else, like, you kind of have to figure out what works for you. But personally, the thing that changed my entire outlook on writing and just my future with writing was finding a critique partner to write with and getting feedback. Because if you're going to be in traditional publishing especially, you are going to have to learn how to take and apply feedback. That is like one of the best skills that you can learn. And the earlier that you can learn that, the better. So that's mine.
Everyone's giving really good advice. I just want you to know. As a pastry chef, and I know this is weird, I like to think that when I'm making something that I really love, my hands kind of impart a flavor on it. Like, I know that sounds really weird, but I think that when you're in the kitchen all the time, you kind of instinctively have this eunice, your eunice that is imparted on your food. And when you're really into it and you love what you're making, it tastes amazing. And I like to apply that to writing. So just make it the most you thing. Like, just impart your flavor on it. Have fun. You don't have to set up these expectations and goals other than finishing it, like everyone else said, and just doing what makes you happy, and don't chase trends because you're going to be chasing forever. Do what you want, and I think if you're happy and you're having fun, that's really the most important thing.
I feel like what we've concluded is that we need like a stock market cat, like those cats that pick stocks, but for like publishing trends. And if we could just have that, then we could be like, all right, what should I write next? No, don't do that. Yeah, I agree with the above. I guess I don't know that I have advice so much as a pep talk, which is write it, because I think every one of us have found readers, because they're out there and they really do love, like, when they read a sci-fi book, they love it, and they're there and they're passionate about it. And maybe it's not the biggest, hottest trend, but you're gonna, if you sell a book and you get it out there, you're gonna find readers. You really were. And if you love sci-fi, like all of us here love sci-fi, you also have found this wonderful community within the greater wonderful publishing community where you're just like, yay, my people. And that's amazing too. So, is it kind of rough? But yeah, but anytime you sit down to write a book, it's bleeding slowly onto your keyboard, but you keep at it because you want to tell these stories and you want to share what you love and are passionate about. And I think if you sit down and do that, then you're gonna find a sense of fulfillment, and you are also going to find your people, your sci-fi people, your reader people, all your people.
Yeah, I love ending on that, because I think that if anything, this panel is just so indicative of that, and of the power, even in maybe perhaps a smaller number than, like, for example, YA fantasy, but the power of word of mouth, and also the power of like really dedicated readers who love the breadth and variety that sci-fi has to offer, and that even in the last couple of years has continued to kind of publish and innovate out and beyond. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. Thank you to these authors. Thank you to everyone's questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them. We didn't get to all of my questions either, and I had a lot that I needed to know for my own personal reasons. But anyway, thank you all so much for one of the panels of my dreams. And yeah, I just hope you all have a really great day. Everyone, the bookshop links for everyone's authors are in the description of the YouTube video. And, you know, just keep enjoying sci-fi. We will always be here.
Thank you, Lily. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Lily. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Bye. Have a great night.